Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast, presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in.
Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast. This is Craig Jeffery, your host today. I am graced with Mike Richards from Treasury Recruitment on today's podcast. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for welcoming me. We're going to have some interesting talks about the world of work, hybrid, recruiting. We're going to keep it short and sweet because these poor people, they need a coffee or three to, when they're listening to me, Craig. Obviously, you're the ringmaster, but back to you, sir. Yeah,
so our title is Work from Home, Return to Office, but as you kind of indicated, we might have called it the move to hybrid because that's where it's going to come down to. Mike, you have a podcast. We'll put that in the show notes. It's a great podcast. And we'll link that in there so they can hear more, Mike, in addition to today's discussion. But let's begin with the work from home, return to office. There's been a steady move back to the office, but not fully back to the office. And there's certainly variations by region and industry. And so Strategic Treasurer just completed a survey of Treasury, and they call it Treasury. We call it Treasury's return to the office. You've been running an ongoing survey on salaries, where you're also capturing return to the office and the hybrid work environment. And so it seemed like a collaboration in talking about these things would be quite useful. But what are some of the variations you're seeing by region and industry?
We were just talking before, and Craig and I were, that in Europe, they had embraced hybrid working before hybrid was a thing. There was more flexibility. Sometimes there were more traditional companies that perhaps were anti it, if you like. They wanted 5 days a week in the office. They didn't need it. But then over time, they realized. Then along came COVID and it enforced it on people. 5 days a week, working from home. And then the slow return to work there, there's bureaucracy around it. There's also about the working population and workers' council saying, well, do we need to work 5 days a week in the office? The answer is no. We've just proved it over the past 2.5, 3 years. In UK, again, similarly, it was, end of that February time, suddenly March, 100% from home. The gradual return, I am seeing, UK Treasury professionals back in the office 2 days a week. That's the norm, I would say. That's where it peaks in our survey and in lots of other ways. I think also what's interesting with the sort of the return to work in the UK is that there are more senior Treasury professionals who are now being asked, strongly encouraged, not told, because they're treasurers, but very strongly encouraged by some of their CFOs to get back in the office. Not 5 days a week, but just 2 or 3 days. And they go, I don't want to. And I'm now starting to see more activity, talking to 2 or 3 clients, in fact, at the moment, where their treasurers are now choosing, it's time to finish. They're retiring because they're going, do you know what? I've had enough of this sort of stuff. And then US, you've got this amazing snapshot, Craig, that I just loved. Do you want to, I'm going to hand it back to you because I just thought it was a really good insight. You're seeing that lots of people are, I don't know, did it vary across the country? I don't know. You perhaps volunteer your answers.
The variations by region and industry, our survey was global and really focused on Treasury as well. 70% had experienced some type of return to office globally. And this is mostly it's return to hybrid. We can break some of that out. North America, it was 64%, so a little less than the overall global average. And that we found interesting. On the banking side, it's up above 80%. So we saw that as a general return to the office. But of that 70% where there was some type of return to office mandate or push, of that 70%, just under 60% had returned to the office mandated. Now, that wasn't always return to the office 100%. There was highly encouraged to return, 27%, mostly on a volunteer basis, 12%, and then some other, aspect there. So that was, that's really interesting to see. It's more of a return to hybrid or return to the office partially. That seems to be the big uptick. And just before we started talking, I was relating an article that was in the Wall Street Journal about globally, there's much more of a return to office in Europe and in Asia compared to North America and the United States. And that's across all professions, not just Treasury. It's probably primarily not Treasury. And it had to do with length of commute, size of homes. And so it showed the least return to the office was in the U.S. because of these types of factors, which is interesting because it seems much more comparable on the Treasury side with what we're seeing in the U.S. and in Europe. They're much more aligned. That seems interesting. This idea of people are primarily moving to 2 to 3 days a week. I mean, that's what you're seeing as well, right? This 2 to 3 days a week out of 5. So it's more hybrid, more mixed than it was in the office prior to COVID.
Well, I think there's that. I think also US clients, we're doing a lot of US recruitment at the moment. And I think, how can I put it? There was a question I wrote here. And again, it would have been good to sort of, well, you couldn't really explore it, but whether you guys were able to dig into what does highly encouraged mean? What does it mean? Is it like, well, I'm going to be in the office 4 days a week. Would you like to be? Do you want to be promoted in the future? It's proven you don't need to be there. I think there is also, on the flip side, there is proof we're social creatures. We want to share an office with people. That's one of the things that we want to do. And also for more junior candidates, again, Craig, you and I have talked about this in the past, they, may need more training, may need to be in the office 3 days a week in the earlier stages to get their job done, to be trained, to go put their hand up. Oh, can you help me? Can you help me? So there's all those different things. But I think also one of the things I was just, again, making some notes. There's a client we were recruiting for back end of last year, and they were saying, but we want people to be based in the home city. I won't say where it is because it's quite obvious where it is. And I was like, look, they don't have to move to you. I'm seeing people coming into town, they'll work the Thursday, Friday in the office, then they'll have the weekend, then the Monday, Tuesday, and then the rest of the time they can be based wherever they like. And they're like, oh no, but we'd really like them based here. Why do they have to move? Why are you enforcing that upon them? And still you've got this working from home, working remotely policy. In actual fact, what I think has happened, in fact, I know has happened, that some of the full-time employees that are already there in situ have not rebelled, but they have pushed up the chain and said, look, we are finding it a negative thing to try and recruit candidates by saying we want them 5 days a week in the office. That's not happening. 3 days a week in the office? Yes, maybe. But also to say they must come from the locality, from the local state. In fact, a lot of them, they were sort of more the district. So then we're just, it's just narrower pool, narrower. Now it's like no pool at all. And I think the more that the employers can get their heads around that, the better.
It's also a situation, a factor of people have been home. The efficiency has been high. There's not a lot of open candidates in the Treasury space. So it's more of there's a little bit more power on the employee side. You want to hire me? I'm willing to go hybrid. I'm willing to go in the office 2, 3, or 4 days a week. I want some time off. And then, like you said, it's where do you draw people from? What's the pool? And if you're in a big city, you have a lot of candidates. If you're in a smaller city, you may not have an opportunity to pull in those candidates. I wonder if that will change as employment shifts over time. If we're not looking at 2% or less unemployment in Treasury, and I'm actually not even sure if that's the real number. You may know it is, but it's it's much harder to recruit people in Treasury these days. Very different from some of the other fields. This situation of there's positives and negatives to working remotely, working from the office, and hybrid. One of the key areas of challenges was coworker relationships and collaboration that we found. If we looked at coworker relationships, 38% saw a deterioration in work from home, as compared to, let's say, hybrid or work from the office. Some, 18%, found it to be an improvement working remotely. So they found their relationships improved. So that was a net negative 20, which was the lowest. Collaboration suffered by a self-reported measure about 31% of the time. Yet collaboration, another 24% saw an improvement. So a net negative 7%. Those were some of the areas where there was a deterioration. And so being intentional in those two areas makes sense. But if you also look at the work from home benefits, job satisfaction, and then that spread was 54%, productivity 38%, and that's pretty significant. Yet 13%, so there was a deterioration in that number. So it depends on the job, what's occurring. Employers, teams need to make sure we're not suffering the deterioration that exists in this hybrid environment. I don't know, any thoughts on the advantages and disadvantages of remote, in-person, and hybrid?
Pre-pandemic, if someone had said to me, Mike, we want flexible working, I'd say, get out of my office. Like, didn't exist. You might pay, yes, you can do every other Friday, or you were trying to move your head around. I've got one of my colleagues, she works 100% from home. And I had to get my head around the idea that's what she wants. So that's what you need to. And if I didn't do that, she would leave and get a job with someone else. So I had to either get my head around it or she'd leave. She'd vote with her feet and things. And I think that's what employers have to do. I think there is an important part of the conversation is about management training, career progression, recognition of in-house teams, in person, versus you've got someone working hybrid and someone working remotely. How do you recognize the contribution from all of those three different groups, if you like, even when they're not three different groups? They're the same group. They're your team. So that's one of the things I would say, that how do people cope with that shift? I've often said as well, prior to this week, and Greg, thank you very much. You name checked. So treasurycareercorner.com. So I get it in there. Podcast.
That's it. Yeah.
That's the one. But what I do, and I try not to do all the talking on that, unlike this, I interview treasurers about their, no, it's weird. I told you, I find this weird. I'm doing the talking and I'm thinking, shut up, ask a question, Mike, and be quiet. But no, coming back to the podcast, prior, all the way through, actually, we started it 4 years ago. I thought we'd last 10 episodes, 270 interviews plus with treasurers right the way across the globe. But the key thing that kept coming up all the time is, look, you've gone from a treasury analyst beginning of your career all the way through to global treasurer. I was like, yeah, manage a team of 50 people. Wow, amazing. How much management training have you got? What? I said, yeah, so you now manage a team of 50 effectively. Yeah, across all these time zones. Yeah. How much do you get coaching you to be this great team? Well, no. And I'm and a lot of them are accidental managers, coaches, mentors. And I think there's a massive gap, if you like. And now this is being highlighted even more. The relevance to this is we've got the in-person team, you've got the remote team, you've got the hybrid. It's another management challenge overlaid on what was already a challenging situation. How do you provide equal opportunities? If someone wants a promotion, do you give it to, Jane, who's in the office, or Bob, who works from home? Well, I see Jane more often. I'm able to communicate with her and I chat to her more and blah, blah, blah. Hang on, what about Bob? He's doing a great job. How do you recognize what he's done as well? I think that's one of the areas, the softer areas that perhaps your survey, my survey didn't, it's so difficult to assess. I mean, do you think that? You've had conversations, you regularly have conversations with Treasury folks. Have you heard as that part of the conversation recently or not?
It depends on the Treasury group and whether they're all geographically located, a single location, whether they have regional Treasury centers. How do you manage geographically? How do you manage across different age cohorts and different learning styles? I think that's probably the biggest area where there's this assumption that we all know how to do it. We all know how to do it well. And I think that's probably a myth. We could all use pointers. And I know I learn a lot. I guess I'll give some examples of, you look at different age cohorts and whatever age cohort you're part of, from your age compared to what mindset you have, that you can have a different mindset than your age cohort would indicate. But if we look at Zoomers, right, the newest generation coming in, you can say, hey, they're lazy. They don't want to do the work. And they don't want to do manual work that's, let's say, lots of keying, keying for an hour, because they can get a job where they're spending all day not keying stuff, not doing manual labor. And they're like, I'm not going to do that dumb stuff. That's actually smart. Like, why would somebody do that? That makes logical sense. It's not necessary. Maybe somebody is lazy, but why would they do something that's dumb? I'm not going to dig a foundation for my house with a shovel. We're going to get somebody with a giant backhoe or earth mover to do that, right? It's like it doesn't make sense. And there's a bit of a water on the face, cold reality when someone says, "I'm not doing that. I can do this over here," and you're like, "Yeah, all of those things make sense." And so we've had conversations with companies where they're like, Can you backfill us and help us automate this process so we can hire people who will stay because they won't do these bad things? And so that's one aspect of changing expectations is one aspect of that. The other is, managing people remotely for us. And I know for you've had people in different cities and different continents. We've always had people in different time zones, different states, particular consulting team, right? They would be in different locations. Why would we move them down to the office? We would also see each other at client sites and events regularly. So there was the ability to do the interaction quite well. Now we have analysts that are located in different cities as well, but we have to be intentional. Most people need some kind of connection once in a while. So they come in the office, once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year, if we're not catching up at a client site. So this ability to manage and handle a career issue, we experience it. We certainly see that in companies, particularly when they've hired people remotely and they didn't do that before. Now, there's even some companies that are saying, you've got to come into the office. It's like, you hired me. I'm in a different city, in a different state or a different region. I really wasn't going to take the job to move. I took it. It was remote. Now you're changing it pretty dramatically. It's not like we went home because of COVID. Now we want people to come back. That's a very different scenario. I think that's a almost impossible thing to manage. I think that addresses part of what you're saying.
It does. And also, but one linkage we haven't talked about, Craig, which is one of the topics, if you like, there as well. I was just, again, we get our knowledge through our salary survey that we host at treasurysalary.com. So if anyone is listening today and thinks, I need to benchmark my salary, that of my team, just go there. We do it globally. We are increasing our numbers throughout the US. And you and I did a previous podcast where we talked about the differentials between the East Coast, West Coast, and some of the lower cost areas. But actually, you're talking about areas. Remote isn't an area. Remote is its own thing in people moving to lower cost centers. And it's that linkage. Now, it seems to have dropped out. I certainly haven't seen any, a lot of puff pieces in the press where they were like, oh, well, if you're a remote worker, you'll get paid less. And, different big names were saying, well, actually, we'll pay our remote workers this cost. And actually this much less, 20% less, because they can live somewhere 20% less cost. But actually that seems to have disappeared a little bit. Now, the reasons for that, what would I guess? I'd say, well, the fact is you've got to pay people what they're worth, not where they're based. And that's one of the key things. I think it's about their contribution to the workplace and what they can do. I had a situation back last year. I actually placed a lady. She's an amazing treasurer. She works 100% remotely for an LA media company, but she's based in New York. But she works 100% remotely. Now, the salary cost wasn't ever a thing that came into the conversation. What came into the conversation was the CFO said, well, and I was saying, oh, do you want them to come across the West Coast sometimes? He's like, no. I was like, why? He said, we've just worked at our kitchen tables, Mike, for 2 years. Why am I then going to say, right, get on a plane, just as you made out there that, why does she need to come see us? He said, in actual fact, I'll probably see her more than when I go to New York. I'll catch up. We'll have lunch or we'll have this. He said, we can Zoom. I'm not expecting her to get on a plane and go to London to a meeting. She can talk to the guys in London at a decent time for her, earlier for me on the West Coast. That's opened up all of those. And that's I would say a very wise client, because he's not saying, putting his old ideals onto, to the recruitment situation. I think this, hybrid working models are here to stay. And it's how people embrace those. And if they don't, it's a disadvantage to you. And if you do embrace them, it's a competitive advantage. If you can say, actually, we're hybrid, at least 1, 2, I've got a client the other day who said, look, we're looking to recruit remotely. What do you think? And it might be a part-time role. I was like, I can do that. I can do that straight away. I've got people that if I put it up there, what we need to do is make sure it's going to work for people. But if you want remote part-time, we can recruit that. He's going to, it's the first time they've ever thought about it. So they haven't got together, but if people are interested, let us know. But the weird bit was that he was like, I haven't even written a job description like that, because for him, it was just blowing his mind. He was going, hang on, he's used to 5 days a week in the office, and he's gone all the way back to, I could get someone remote part-time and fit it around their lives, and it's about getting the job done.
A couple things on your comments there, Mike. On the back on some of the stats. Pre-pandemic to what's expected in July 2023, because we asked about 5 or 6 months into the future. Pre-pandemic, 8% were fully working from home. Expected in July 2023 is 17%, more than a doubling. Hybrid went from 16% pre-pandemic, expected is 69%, which is really, really pretty amazing, right? That's a little bit more than 4 times growth, and that's the dominant one. And fully work from the office from 73% to 10%. So, fully work from office 10%, fully work from home 17%. And then the middle is hybrid, 70%, 69%. Huge shift. The idea of arbitrage and value, pay people. How do you pay people what they're worth? And there is an aspect to cost. Like if you look at U.S. cities, for example, I think based on the cost indexes per cities, I think New York is about 225. So 2.25 times the cost to live there as in the average U.S. city. Okay, so if you're paying someone 100 somewhere else, you have to pay them 225 there to be equivalent, versus someone lives in a place that's 80 or versus a place that's 170. Maybe Silicon Valley. Very, very, very different cost structures just for a place to live, et cetera. So the residual, it's very different, and the idea of you might be able to get skilled people without having I'll call it the excessive cost, or above midline, or 2 standard deviations above the normal cost, gives companies some greater flexibility, but it also gives people the chance to live where they want to live. I think there's a lot of opportunities there.
There is, Craig. You and I, we did our briefing call the other day, and we talked about this. But there was a client that I was going to recruit for, and they came to me and they said, "Oh, we're a bit more traditional. So we want people back in the office 100% of the time." We're like, okay, that was going to be pretty tough, because we said, look, only 1 in 20 people, 5% of our survey said they wanted to be back in the office and were happy to be back in this 5 days a week. And they went, oh, that's fine. And we're like, no, we're all right, thanks. They were like, what? I said, so we have to go to 100 people and only 5 of them say they're interested in your role straight away. And they're like, yeah. And then you and I talked about the fact they also said, oh, we're quite traditional, we're quite paper-based. And we were like, right, we're out. We don't feel we can help you. We just didn't feel they were a client we could support, because we think actually the clients we support want to be flexible, open-minded and moving forward and things like that. That was one of the things. The other point I was going to make there is, I think a tougher, and again, linked to salary reward, you just touching on what you talked about, I think is actually employees demonstrating their value when asking for a pay rise when they're 100% remote or hybrid or in the office. That throws up questions, because there's this, inflation costs and everything else, cost of living increases. People are then working from home. They've got bigger electricity bills to pay. Do you contribute to that as an employer? Or but you've still got an office, or do you downsize your office? Do you give any of that saving back to the employee? It's emphasizes the importance, if you like, of them focusing on them as individuals. I think when you're managing them and things like that, but there's a lot of different things coming in at the moment. When I'm having conversations with candidates who have done the salary survey, and I say, right, why aren't you happy in your role? We're actually going to probably expand our survey a little bit. Craig helped, not you, Craig. Craig's taking over the world, as we well know, which is a good thing. It's a good thing.
No, they aren't. Craig is like, nobody's naming their kids Craig anymore. It's like it's below. Max with 3 X's. MAXXX is more popular than Craig nowadays.
I've got a great
We're
Craig
going
in my
away.
office. Well, Craig in my office, he was the one that originally came up with the 3 questions about, are you back, do you want to be back in the office? How many days a week is your employer? And how many days do you want to be back in the office? So sort of looking at the sort of 3 balances. But one of the things we also ask is about why are you happy or unhappy in your role? And, what is that based upon? Is that the recognition by the company of Treasury, or is it your boss, or is it the company itself? One of the other things we're starting with just developing the questions around it a little bit, not to completely copy yourselves, but do it in a slightly different way, is it also the working style? We don't quite know how we're going to phrase it. And we were brainstorming it the other day. Is it the fact that actually your work has changed, or there is a pressure for you to be back in the office? So it's not your boss. Is it the company pressurizing you? Is what are the, trying to get under the skin of why some of the guys are, and also the flip side, why are they happier? Are you happier because everyone says, I don't mind what you do? I recently said to my guys in the office, I said, look, if you want to come into the office, come in. They actually like coming in then. But my colleague Sophie, she was sort of saying, is it all right if I work from home next week? I was like, why are you asking me? Just put it in the diary. Just make sure that there's some people who are, here to us. And we've got people to man the phones and make sure everything works. As long as you guys, we work it as a team, I think that's the key thing. More communication.
One of the items, probably the last topic to talk about in our survey, was the improvement in deterioration. I wanted to talk about this one. It's like mental health. 46% indicated there was an improvement, across their department. 46% improvement in mental health. That's significant and notable. And then if you look at deterioration, there was 19% that saw the deterioration there in mental health. So we can look at just the net spread and say, hey, 27% saw this improvement. Our work here is done. But it's like, okay, there's a significant improvement in mental health, but 1 in 5 said there's a deterioration in mental health. And so I think the hybrid clearly seems to be the place where we're going to stay generally. Not every business, not every location, not every job. But there's some concerning things on the deterioration side where there might be a net benefit, but there's these issues where I'm not saying we're leaving people behind, but we have to address some of those negative things in this new environment of hybrid work. I don't know if you had any thoughts about that, as well as we learn to manage remotely. We also have to be concerned about mental health, communication, work relationships, productivity across the board. Even though most of those are net positive, there's a significant percentage where there's deterioration.
I think the key thing, there's 2 or 3 points in there, but I think one of the key things is it's to do something that lots of Treasury folks are really terrible at, and that is to focus on the softer skills. Treasury, by its very nature, is about making sure the balance sheet is de-risked, making sure very practical issues about the company balance sheet, cash, where's this going, left, right, treasury management system, are we doing this? But at the end of the day, to turn on that treasury management system, to run it, to do everything else, is run by a team. Run by individuals. I spoke at one of the Eurofinance conferences and I said, around this room, you've got all these different tables, one about TMSs, one about risk management in these countries. And I said, do you know what? You would be scared to have a talent table because that would be a massive round table. It would take over the room because we'd be talking talent. We talk about people. And I think that's the thing. It's about, for a lot of treasurers, accidental managers, if you like, of teams, it's about taking the time to connect with their employees, remote, in the office or otherwise, whatever the balance is, to listen to their concerns, appreciate the work they're doing, again, which is sometimes tough because, you're right, you've achieved this, next. Well, and for you as a manager, if you're listening today, it's to maybe look back at yourselves and not be critical, but think, right, do you know what I might need is some management training and coaching. And I've been shouting about it. It's not something we give, but I think someone comes in and says, right, management training for treasurers and treasury professionals is a great sideline business. Someone getting there, because leading remote teams, leading in-person teams is hard enough. Remote teams on top of that and hybrid, you're like, boom, boom, boom. I think that's the key thing. I think, any help that can be provided for overstretched treasurers already is going to be welcome.
I think so, Mike. Mike, thanks so much for your time and your comments. Everybody, you can see links to Treasury Recruitment Company and the salary survey and the survey that Mike's put out that includes information on hybrid work from home. On the Strategic Treasurer website, we'll put links down there as well. The survey results for our return to office or return to hybrid. We'll be sharing summary information. All the details are available to those who completed this particular survey, but there'll be some useful summary information for you as well. Thanks again, Mike. Really appreciate it.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.